Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this professional learning info session. My name is Cassie, and I'm joined by my colleagues Laurel Zyma and Romney Webb of the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. And we are going to spend the next 30 minutes with all of you to share a little bit more information about one of our professional learning offerings at the Columbia Climate School this fall. So just a quick introduction for those of you who are perhaps joining us for the first time or learning about the Columbia Climate School for the first time. Our mission is to develop and inspire knowledge-based solutions and educate future climate leaders for just and prosperous societies on a healthy planet. We are the first new school at Columbia University in 25 years, and it's extremely exciting for us. The school is set up in a way that allows us to connect and amplify and advance new areas of climate research and impact across Columbia and beyond. And so we have a variety of educational offerings, and we, across all of our offerings on the education side, we aim to provide interdisciplinary knowledge for climate leaders across diverse interests and backgrounds. For our professional learning workshops, these are meant for working professionals and adult learners who want to further develop their skills or develop new skills and explore topics that are of interest to them for job-related purposes without the commitment of a long-term commitment of a degree program. Our professional learning workshops are taught by the same faculty, researchers, practitioners as our degree programs, so they offer the same level of quality and rigor. These are just provided and offered online with a flexible schedule for our learners. And all of our professional learning workshops are 15 hours in length. They're offered in English. Zoom is what we use for the platform, and everything is recorded, and participants will have access to all the recordings and materials for a year after the workshop has ended. So there's no concerns about missing a session if you need to leave early. We're extremely flexible. The professional learning workshops are non-credit workshops, therefore participants are participants of the workshops. You do not become a student of Columbia University, and there is no required sort of homework or readings and assignments. Our instructors always suggest readings and guide conversations and provide materials, but there is no sort of official homework or grading. These are fee-based opportunities, and the rate for a workshop in the 2022-2023 academic year is $1,499 US dollars. And we do have reduced rate options that are available for participants for certain categories, including participants who are current students, those who are former participants or taken workshops with us before, those working in government NGO sectors, as well as alumni of Columbia University. So I'm going to, in a minute, put an email in the chat box here, just so you can email either Laurel or myself if you have any questions about any of this information. The one last thing I want to mention here in terms of the workshops is that there is a deadline to sign up and register, and this is 2 weeks before a workshop is supposed to start. So for Romney Webb's workshop, which she's going to tell us about momentarily, it will be the deadline to register will be October 4th. So a quick note about today's session. Again, this is being recorded, and we'll share the recording with everyone afterwards. Please use the Q&A box today if you have any questions. Laurel and I will be monitoring that Q&A box. You won't be able to raise your hand or chat with each other, but hopefully you'll get all your questions answered. And if you have anything else to add, feel free to just email us and let us know. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Romney, who's the instructor for our Climate Risk and the Law workshop this fall. Very exciting to have her offering this for the first time. And she's going to tell you a little bit about herself and the workshop and what she expects to cover over the 7 or so weeks. Romney.
Great, thanks, Cassie, and hi, everyone. As Cassie said, my name is Romany Webb. I'm a research scholar at Columbia Law School and a senior fellow at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law, and I'm going to serve as the instructor for climate risk and the law. I'll tell you a little bit more about me in a minute, but first, I'll just go over what we're going to cover today so you have a sense of what's coming. Hopefully you all can see these slides, and I'm going to just stop my video. So we'll start with a little bit of background on me, do a quick introduction to climate risk. What is it and why should we be thinking about it? Then a quick overview of the workshop and the learning objectives, a walk through the tentative schedule for the workshop, a bit of information about some guest speakers, and then we will have time at the end for questions from all of you. As I said, I am a research scholar at Columbia Law School and a senior fellow at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. So I'm a lawyer by training. I have a Master's of Law from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Bachelor of Laws and a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of New South Wales in Australia, which is where I'm originally from. I started my career in Australia at a large private law firm, working for clients across a number of industry sectors, but primarily in the water and energy spaces. After a few years working in private practice, I moved to California to do my master's at UC Berkeley, and then I stayed on and worked as a researcher for a few years at the Berkeley Energy and Climate Institute. In 2014, I moved to the University of Texas at Austin to join the Kay Bailey Hutchison Center for Energy Law and Business. And then in 2016, I moved to Columbia to take up my current position at the Sabin Center. For those of you who might not be familiar with the Sabin Center, we are an academic center, a joint center of Columbia Law School and the Climate School. Our mission is to develop innovative legal techniques to fight climate change and to train lawyers and law students in their use. Our work spans all levels of governance, from the local to the global, and we work across a really broad range of sort of economic sectors, from energy, transportation, industry, shipping, and the like. My own work focuses primarily in sort of three areas. One is the energy transition, thinking about how we decarbonize our energy systems. The second is carbon management, thinking about whether and how we can utilize things like carbon capture and carbon removal to help address climate change. And then the final sort of key area of work that I do is around climate risk and resilience. So thinking about how we prepare for and manage the risks associated with climate change and enhance resilience or the ability of natural and human systems to withstand climate impacts. And so that will be the focus of our workshop. Before I get into the specifics of that, though, I just wanted to provide a quick introduction to the idea of climate risk. We know that the concentration of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere is rising, and that is in turn causing temperatures to rise, which is what this graph shows. In its latest report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change concluded that it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. And we know that the extent of future warming will depend on the extent of future greenhouse gas emissions, but the IPCC projects that temperatures will continue to increase until at least mid-century, and that we are very likely to see warming of 2 degrees Celsius or more unless greenhouse gas emissions decline really rapidly prior to 2050. Rising temperatures are, of course, already leading to changes in other weather patterns. We're already seeing sort of increases in the frequency and severity of many types of extreme weather events, such as heat waves and floods. And those rising temperatures are also contributing to so-called slow onset climate impacts like sea level rise. And all of them pose serious risks to human and natural systems. And those risks are already manifesting. So last year in the US alone, there were 20 separate weather and climate related disasters with losses exceeding $1 billion each. this year is already off to a bad start. And if you just look at the first 6 months of the year, from the start of January to the start of July, there were 9 of these billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. To put that in perspective, if you look historically and adjust for inflation, on average, there were only 7 of these billion-dollar disasters per year in the past. And so we're seeing this increase in these really severe, costly, and sometimes deadly weather and climate events. Climate scientists are increasingly able to evaluate and really sort of quantify the impact or the contribution that climate change makes to these extreme weather events. And so you might have seen reports like this one, which discusses the impact of climate change on Hurricane Harvey, which hit Texas back in 2017. And scientists estimated that climate change increased the total amount of rainfall associated with Hurricane Harvey by 15% and made it 3 times more likely to occur. And so to arrive at these sorts of numbers, climate scientists use what's known as attribution science, which in very basic terms explores the link between human activities and climate change. And there's a subfield within attribution science known as extreme event attribution, which examines how human-induced climate change alters the probability, severity, and other characteristics of observed extreme weather events. In addition to evaluating the contribution of climate change to past events, climate scientists are also able to predict with really increasing levels of granularity, so future climate impacts. I'm sure you've all heard about climate modeling, which is used to predict the impact of rising atmospheric greenhouse gas levels on things like temperature and precipitation. Historically, we relied on global climate models that produce very coarse resolution projections showing, for example, anticipated conditions over an entire continent or an entire country. But scientists can now produce much finer scale projections that show, for example, anticipated conditions in a particular state or even a particular county. And so this image, which I included with no context, just is intended to give you an example of what's possible. It's from an academic study that was published a couple of years ago, and it shows the projected change in precipitation by mid-century on a county by county level. And you can see that there's really significant variation in the projected changes. And so if you only looked at a national average or even a state average, you really wouldn't pick up on that variation. And so having this more granular data is really useful when we're thinking about the specific risks that climate change poses and how to prepare for and manage them. And that's really the focus of the workshop. The workshop will explore sort of whether and to what extent this advanced scientific data is informing legal responses to climate change. So whether scientific information about the risks posed by climate change informs legal decisions, both in the courts and at administrative agencies. And we'll also look at whether existing legal structures sort of appropriately account for and promote effective management of climate-related risks. The primary focus will be on physical climate risk, so risks associated with the direct physical impacts of climate change, like rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns, really what I've been talking about tonight. There's a separate category of climate risk that's often talked about called transition risk. And that's really the risks associated with government and market responses to climate change. So changes in law, policy, markets, etc., that result from efforts to mitigate or adapt to climate change. We'll talk a bit about transition risk in the workshop, but the primary focus, as I said, will be on physical risk and sort of whether and how that risk is reflected for and accounted for in existing legal frameworks. Our primary focus will be on US federal law, but we will touch on some other jurisdictions, including some US state law issues. And the workshop will take an interdisciplinary approach that combines science, law, policy, economics, etc. So To give you a little bit more detail, this is a tentative class schedule. The workshop will run over 7 weeks on Tuesdays in October and November. Our first class will be on October 18, provide an introduction to the concept of climate risk and some background on the science of climate risk. So what can scientists tell us about the role that climate change played in past extreme weather events? How do they draw the link between climate change and a specific extreme weather event? How do they model future climate impacts? What information can modeling provide about how individual climate variables like temperature or precipitation will change in the future? How granular are those projections? What are the uncertainties associated with them? Once we have that sort of background on climate risk and the science around climate risk, we'll then explore how that science informs legal decision making, both in the courts and by administrative agencies. So our second class on October 25th, we'll discuss, focus on the courts, thinking about sort of how climate science has been used in recent court cases, seeking to compel governments to regulate greenhouse gas emissions and to hold governments and emitters liable for damage caused by climate change. We'll explore some of the challenges to using climate science in that sort of litigation and some of the ways that those challenges could be overcome. Then in week 3, we'll discuss sort of climate risk in the context of the administrative state. So how is climate science used by administrative agencies? To what extent do agencies consider scientific information regarding climate-related risks in regulatory and other decision making? What are the challenges to doing that? And again, how can those challenges be addressed? Once we've done that, we'll then dive into 4 case studies, which will allow us to really go deeper into how climate risk manifests in specific sectors and what the sort of legal and regulatory framework looks like in those sectors and how and where it accounts for climate risk. So our first class will focus on agriculture, which is at really huge risk from the impacts of climate change. We'll think about how existing legal and regulatory structures account for that risk. So to give you an example, something like federal crop insurance programs, which are intended to protect against crop losses due to natural disasters like droughts. We know the science tells us that the incidence and severity of droughts is increasing in many parts of the country. Is that increase factored into existing crop insurance programs? Do those programs promote actions to mitigate drought-related risk, et cetera? Our second case study will focus on the built environment, so looking at climate risk to homes and other structures, to transportation systems. Think about again how that climate risk is affecting legal decisions on things like where to build new infrastructure, how to build new infrastructure. Our third case study will be on the energy system, which if you've been watching the news recently, you will know is highly susceptible to the impacts of climate change. So how do we create legal structures that appropriately sort of address and manage that risk and ensure that our energy systems remain reliable in the face of more severe climate impacts? And then finally, we'll talk about climate risks to the financial system. And there we'll focus on sort of recent regulatory proposals to promote better disclosure of climate-related risks. For example, the Securities and Exchange Commission proposed rule that some of you might have heard of, and consider sort of ways to ensure that climate-related risk is better reflected in financial regulation and in financial markets. Throughout this, we'll have a number of guest speakers. This is an initial list of people we currently have lined up. We might add 1 or 2 more, but for now we have Radley Horton, who's a climate scientist based at Columbia's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. He will present on and speak to us about sort of the science of climate risk attribution science, extreme event attribution science, and also some climate modeling. We'll also have Jessica Wentz, who's a business operations manager for Remote Sensing Systems, which is our climate science research firm out in California. A lot of her work is around how sort of advanced climate science is used in court proceedings. So she'll talk to us about that. We'll also have Peter Lehner, who's at Earth Justice, an expert on climate impacts on agriculture. So he'll come for that first case study. And Michael Panfil, who's the Director of Climate Risk Strategies at Environmental Defense Fund, does a lot of work on climate risk in the energy sector and in the financial sector. So I think that's all I had. I will take these slides down. Happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much, Romney. So I want to open it up to everyone who's here for any questions about either the workshop content or registration or any logistical items. While you think of any potential questions, I just wanted to add that these workshops, we've done these for about 2 academic years now, and this is our 3rd year. And what we have found is one of the most interesting aspects of these workshops, aside from the important knowledge that you gain, is really the opportunities to engage with our Columbia faculty, researcher, and instructors, as well as experts in the field who are not at Columbia. We truly believe that it's extremely important for us to be doing research, but also making that very applicable to different fields and different sectors. And I think one of the most interesting things has always been the individuals who end up participating in the workshops. They come also from a very different, wide array of fields, sectors, and everyone is at different stages in their careers, which makes these workshops extremely interesting for participants as well. And you have the opportunity to network both with the instructors and speakers, as well as with contacts that you might keep after the workshops. So I think that's just another really unique aspect of these opportunities. Like I said, if you have any, I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but if you think of anything in the before our registration deadline, please feel free to contact us. I put our a group email in the chat, so it's learn@climate.columbia.edu. And if you think of any questions related to content for Romney, please let us know as well, and we'll get everything clarified for you. A recording of this will be made available, so you can rewatch it. And if I see no questions, last call for any questions. These sessions are extremely efficient, and everyone is usually hopefully that means we've given you all the information and appropriately. Romney, is there anything else you want to add? Oh, I see one question, but is there anything you want to add? You're welcome, Kara. Before we wrap up here.
No, I just say if people do have questions about the content, you feel free to email me directly, or you can contact me through Cassie. And I hope to see many of you at the workshop.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks everyone for taking the time to join us. We'll be reaching out shortly with everyone who's joined us live today. We hope you have a great evening, afternoon, wherever you are, and hope to see you all in the upcoming workshop. All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.